The topic for this e-lecture is morphology and word classes. Now remember to do the reading before you watch this e-lecture and obviously to do the Moodle quiz afterwards. Now morphology is the study of the structure of words and the rules for word formation, and basically a morpheme can be defined as the minimal unit of meaning. Sometimes morphemes are words on their own, but other times we can combine morphemes with other morphemes to make new words. So an example could be the word book. That just consists of the one morpheme and it means something. All right, we can talk about what a book is and so on. But we can also talk about books with an S on the end, right? So books consists of two morphemes. We have the noun book, and then we have this S on the end that signifies the fact that we're talking about more than one book. Now, when we're talking about morphemes, it can be helpful to talk about the different types of morphemes. We're going to look at a couple of different ways of sort of grouping morphemes into different categories. The first one is free morphemes. We also call these roots. For instance, book, that's an example of a free morpheme because it's a morpheme that can function as a word on their own, okay, without adding anything to them. Then we have bound morphemes. We also call these affixes, and bound morphemes can never stand alone and function as a word. So for instance, the S in books is an example, right? The S on its own there doesn't actually mean anything. One thing that isn't mentioned here is stem. So if you have a root and you add an affix, you get a stem. And then you can add even more affixes, all right, and you can keep building. And we're going to see a couple of examples in a bit. We also have something called bound roots, and bound roots are roots that cannot stand alone and they can only occur in combination with other morphemes. So we have the example of sieve in receive, conceive, perceive, and so on. Obviously, sieve cannot actually stand on its own. All right, it only works in conjunction with an affix. So re, con, per, they're all affixes. Now we can also divide bound morphemes according to what they do in the grammar. So here we look at first derivational morphemes and then secondly inflectional morphemes. So derivational morphemes, basically this is when the addition of a bound morpheme to a free morpheme creates a new word with a new meaning and or a change in word class. So the example could be drive and driver. So drive, it's an action, right? It's a verb, and we can add the morpheme driver, so er. All right, we can add that to the end, and all of a sudden we have a person who drives. So this is a noun. So that's a change in word class, and obviously it's a change in meaning as well, talking about an action and talking about a person. So driver, this er ending, that's a derivational morpheme. So it's a bound morpheme because it doesn't work on its own, but it's also a derivational morpheme because it changes the word class and the meaning. If we look at the second bullet point, possible and impossible, we can see that im is a derivational morpheme which just changes the meaning. All right, it obviously reverses the meaning of possible and then impossible. Now, when a new word is created through derivation, other possible derivations may be blocked. So we can, for instance, have communist, so ist, right? That's the derivational morpheme. But that also means that we don't need communite. All right, we just have communist. Also, it's important to keep in mind that some derivations trigger pronunciation changes. So, for instance, specific, it ends with a C, right, but a kind of K sound. But we can then add a derivational morpheme and get specificity. And in specificity, that final C, the letter C, becomes pronounced as an S, right? Inflectional morphemes are the other types of morphemes, and these are productive, we say, and that means that they can apply freely to almost any appropriate base. So for instance, most nouns will take the inflectional suffix s to create a plural, right? So inflectional morphemes are, again, bound morphemes that add grammatical information to a word. So the difference between dog and dogs, or book and books. Again, this s means plural, but it doesn't actually change the meaning of the word. So inflection morphology doesn't change the meaning, but obviously it either tells you something about the number, all right, there's more than one dog, or it gives you information about the time that something happened. So walk and walked. So walk is the present tense and walked is the past tense, meaning that it took place in the past, all right? So this is grammatical information. Now we can't just add morphemes, all right, sort of willy-nilly. They are added to a base in a fixed order, and this fixed order then reflects an underlying structure. So here we have the example unsystematic, and we can see that the word unsystematic consists of 3 morphemes, all right, and system, we can see that's the only one that sort of makes any sense. So this is the root, okay, this is the initial word, and that's a noun, and we can then see that first we can add atic, which is a suffix, and if you add that we get systematic, and it becomes an adjective. So we've changed the word class and we've changed the meaning, so we're talking about derivation here. We can then go one step further, right? So obviously this is a stem, the root with an affix creates a stem, and we can add un, so we get unsystematic. So we still have an adjective, but we've changed the meaning, so un is also a derivational morpheme. And we can see that this is the only possible solution, because we cannot say unsystem, all right? We cannot say we have a noun and we add un first. Unsystem simply doesn't exist, all right? So this is the only possible structure. Here is another example, and it's the same thing. We can see we start with a verb there, believe, and then we add some affixes. There are different ways of creating new words, though. One way is clipping, and that's where we simply cut a word in half or an even smaller piece and just use part of it. So we get fax, for instance, from the slightly longer word, facsimile, or deli from delicatessen. We can also create new words through back formation, and back formation it's a little bit different. It's a different way of creating a new word, and basically it's because, let's take the example of burglar. So a burglar, that was the original word, right? A burglar, it's a noun. But obviously people wanted to think, what does a burglar do? Well, maybe it's a bit like a driver. So if a driver drives, then a burglar burgles. So the verb burgle came after the noun burglar. All right, so if you look at the history of the English language, this is how it came about. We also have blending. This is straightforward enough. It's when you mix 2 words together. So we have breakfast and lunch becoming brunch. We also have acronyms. So acronyms is when you take the initial letter of a range of words and put them together. So CD, for instance, that's an acronym. But also stuff like radar and laser. They're actually also acronyms. Conversion is where you keep the word in its original form, but you simply change the word class. So we can see a report. Well, that's a noun, but it comes from the verb to report, and then the outcome of reporting something is a report. But it was the verb that came first, and then the noun is created on the basis of that. Finally, we have coinage, which is something we use usually in relation to new inventions, for instance. So we have nylon and Xerox here, also Google. That's a new word, right? And it's coinage. We say that it's created through coinage. Compounds, that's yet another way of making new words. But this is where you join 2 or more words together to make a new word. So we also know this from Danish, where we call them sammensætte, or usually sammensætte navneord. Now, in English, it's important to know that the rightmost word in a compound is the head, and it's the head which determines both the meaning but also the word class of this new word. So in the example headstrong, we can see head is a noun, strong is an adjective, and strong is the rightmost word. So it's the head, it means headstrong is also an adjective. It's also important to know that the stress on English compounds falls on the first word. So we get greenhouse, and it allows us to differentiate it from a greenhouse. Finally, the meaning of a compound is not always the sum of the meaning of its parts. So we can talk about house cat, which is a cat that lives in a house and it's a pet, right? But there's nothing from the house in the cat. It's not a cat made from bricks or something like that. Now, certain bound morphemes will only attach to certain words. So if you look at the first bullet points here, we can say unfair, unbelievable, unkind, all right, but we cannot say on walk or on house. So we can see that un likes to attach to words describing properties, but not words describing actions. We can then try to look at the affix able or able here. We can see that we can't say fairable, kindable, but we can say believable, drinkable, solvable, readable, and all of that. So here we see that able likes to attach itself to words describing actions, but not words describing properties. So word classes then are classifications of words into types in accordance with patterns of morphology, syntactic behavior, and semantics. So semantics means meaning. Now I've uploaded a list of the word classes in English, all right, to your Moodle folder, and I'm just gonna find it here for you. So basically this is a long list and you guys should just have a look in your own time, but basically you can see here that if we look at verbs, they're called udsagnsord, and we can see a couple of keywords just about their morphology, all right, the fact that we can inflect verbs for tense, person, number, and mood, all right, and if we do that, it's important, for instance, to keep in mind that the third person singular present tense morpheme is the S morpheme, so that is he drinks. We can also see something about the syntax of verbs and also the semantics, all right? And then nouns, again, a bit about their morphology and their syntax and so on. And obviously this course is structured around these word classes, so we will be revisiting these sort of throughout the 2 semesters of this course. So let's just go back to this. Now, when we talk about word classes, we talk about 2 categories. We have open word classes and closed word classes. So the open word classes are basically word classes where we can add new members, all right? So nouns, we have so many, hundreds and thousands of nouns, okay, in the English language, and we can add new ones, so new inventions and so on. We can simply add a new one. Same with verbs, right? We have lots and lots of verbs describing different actions, and we can easily add a new verb. So Google, as I mentioned earlier, that's also a verb, right? And that's a brand new one that we've recently added. Now, closed word classes are smaller, all right? They don't have as many words or members in them, and it's very rare that we add new items. So pronouns and numerals, prepositions, okay, these are all closed word classes, and it's very rare that we add a new numeral. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. What else, right? What else do we need? How can we add a new numeral? So pronouns, obviously, we can sometimes add a new pronoun if we want to avoid, for political correctness reasons, sort of he and she. So sometimes we see this sort of added, but it's very, very rare. So that was the end of this e-lecture. You should now go and do the Moodle quiz to test your knowledge, all right? And it's really important because it also gives me an idea of which parts we need to cover in class. Obviously, you can always rewatch this lecture again if there are things that you find particularly tricky.